in the first cabinet we've had since the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. Would I now call for a 2 minutes silence, but can we all stand for a 2 minute silence? Thank you. Okay, thanks for that, colleagues. I now call for the sedent and any apologies. Christine will help us with that.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So we have Councillor Douglas Reid.
Yeah.
Councillor Jim McMahon.
Yeah.
Councillor John McFadden.
Here.
Councillor Elaine Cowan. Councillor Maureen Mackay.
Present.
Councillor Ian Linton.
Here.
Councillor Graham Barton.
Here.
I have an apology from Councillor Barry Douglas. Councillor Neil Ingram.
Here.
Councillor Claire Maitland. Here. Councillor Drew Filson. I have an apology from Harriet Johnston and Babs Mowat. Do we have Alan Vint?
Yes, here.
And Jackie Livingston.
Yes, I'm here.
And I have an apology from Ian Pettigrew. Thanks, Chair.
Christine. Okay, go to item 1, which is declarations of interest. I don't think there's any obvious ones here. No. Okay, and then going to item 2E, and that's early learning and childcare annual review of sustainable rate for funded providers and childminders. And Janie Allen will take us through that.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. This report presents information on the annual review of the sustainable rate for funded providers in the voluntary and private sector and childminders who are on the Council's flexible framework to deliver funded early learning and childcare places to eligible children aged 2 to 5 years, and seeks agreement from Cabinet on the hourly rate for academic year 2022-23 for funded providers and childminders as per the recommendations set out in paragraph 3. Paragraphs 4 to 12 set out the background to early learning and childcare and the interim guidance to the national standard, which is expected to be implemented in full by August 2023. A key plank of funding follows the child approach is the payment of a sustainable rate to funded providers, including childminders. Individual local authorities are responsible for developing their own approach to settling payment rates for funded providers in the statutory provision of early learning and childcare. Paragraphs 14 to 23 sets out the factors to be considered from the guidance for setting sustainable rates for funded providers, including the rate will support delivery of high quality early learning experiences for all children. The rate will be reflective of the cost of delivery, including the delivery of national policy objectives. The rate will allow for investment in the setting in relation to staff, resources and physical environment, and it will also enable payment of the real living wage for those childcare workers delivering the funded entitlement. The principles in the guidance notes the importance of the rate setting process being underpinned by an evidence-based approach, transparency and partnership working between local authorities and funded providers in the private, third and childminding sectors. The guidance also highlights that from a local authority perspective, the rate must be sustainable for authorities in terms of the budgets available, and that the following points are also important to consider when setting a sustainable rate. The rate does not have a detrimental effect on the local authority's ability to continue to pay for the service in the long term. The wider package of in-kind benefits, which are separate to the sustainable rate available to the funded provider as part of the contract with the local authority. And the rate does not need to be cross-subsidised by parents and carers through charges for non-funded hours. Given the importance of sustainable rates for the financial sustainability of these providers, local authorities identified a need for more support in gathering robust evidence on the cost of delivery, which would then be used as the starting point for developing the local sustainable rates. To support this, COSLA and local authorities, through the Improvement Service, commissioned Ipsos Mori to undertake an independent cost collection exercise. Paragraphs 24 to 32 highlight the key points of the National Cost Collection Exercise for funded providers and childminders, which included questions about their current costs, for example, staff, rent, bills, etc., their income capacity and occupancy, and the fees charged to parents. Providers were also asked whether there were additional costs beyond inflation that they expected to incur in future years. The main aim of these surveys was to produce up-to-date estimates of the actual costs of providers providing an hour of early learning and childcare in order to inform planning, modelling and discussions about rate setting. Individual responses from providers were confidential and not seen by anybody outside of Ipsos Mori. Only aggregate results, for example, council level figures, were provided to local authorities where providers were based, and it was not possible to identify individual providers from these aggregate results. Where the response rate was high, outputs from the cost collection exercise were made available at a local authority level. Where there was not a sufficiently high response rate for a reliable output at a local authority level, outputs were provided across a group of local authorities at regional improvement collaborative level. Ipsos Mori used the information provided to estimate the average rate per hour of providing childcare in each local authority area. This information, alongside data about likely inflation and other costs that might affect providers in future years, informed our discussions with providers about the sustainable rate. In terms of our own provider engagement, we've engaged with our 7 funded providers and a sample group of the 42 childminders on the flexible framework following receipt of the outputs from the Ipsos Mori survey in order to help inform the rate setting process for August 22 onwards. In some cases, this has included sharing the outputs of the cost collection exercise with individual providers and discussing the further contextual information feeding into rate setting, while being clear about the local political processes to be followed. Paragraphs 35 to 60 set out information about the annual review for funded providers. The flexible framework for early learning and childcare sets out the commitment to an annual review of the sustainable rate and the relevant criteria of the national standard rather than an inflationary uplift. The current hourly rate for our funded providers is £5.50 per hour for 11 40-hour places for 3 and 5-year-olds and eligible 2-year-olds. And in addition, there is a payment of £3 per meal per day or the provision of a meal directly from East Ayrshire Council's catering service. Funded providers can also register for the Scottish Milk and Healthy Snacks Scheme to receive a flat rate of 58.2 pence per child per day for a daily portion of plain fresh cow's milk or specified non-dairy alternative and a healthy snack of fruit or vegetables. A questionnaire was recently issued to our fund providers seeking information in relation to Criteria 7, business sustainability, Criteria 8, fair working practices, including payment of the real living wage, and 9, payment processes of the national standard. Based on the information available from the questionnaire returns and the output from the Ipsos Mori cost collection exercise, the current hourly rate of £5.50 plus the payment of £3 per meal per day or provision of a meal, and the Scottish Milk and Healthy Snack rate of 58.2 pence per child per day indicates that this meets providers' delivery costs and for the majority allows for some reinvestment. Moving on to childminders, the currently hourly rate for funded childminders is £4.50 per hour plus £3 per day per meal, where the childminder provides this. Therefore, a childminder caring for 3 children who are wholly funded for 1140 hours will earn £13.50 per hour plus £3 meal payment per day for each child. Childminders can also register for the Scottish Milk and Healthy Snacks Scheme to receive the 58.2 pence per child per day for the milk, alternative non-dairy drink and a healthy snack. In addition to the Ipsos Mori cost collection exercise, we undertook a small-scale consultation regarding the sustainable rate, with respondents being unanimous in their view that the hourly rate should be increased to reflect the rise in delivery costs and cost of living. Paragraphs 58 and 59 illustrates the points that have been considered in setting out hourly rates for childminders delivering funded early learning and childcare. Therefore, the proposed new hourly rate for academic year 22-23 is £4.76, with the meal rate remaining unchanged at £3 per attendance. Paragraph 61 to 63 provides information about the Scottish Milk and Healthy Snacks Scheme, and to note that from the 1st of April 2022, an interim national combined flat rate of 58.2 pence is in place for milk, non-dairy alternatives and a healthy snack for every eligible child. All 36 of our own early childhood centres and 7 funded providers are registered for the scheme. Currently, only 11 of the 42 childminders who are on the flexible framework have chosen to register with the scheme. Where relevant, comment is made under the headings of policy, community planning, legal, human resources, equality impact implications and net zero implications. In terms of financial implications, it is important to note that the government's resource spending review published in May of this year outlines a flat cash spending plan for early learning and childcare policy portfolio until 2026-27. Given the inflationary pressures and pay increases to public sector wages, this will mean an actual reduction in available funding. Scottish Government are transitioning to a new stage of the delivery of the 1140 expansion programme and moving beyond the multi-year funding agreement, so we are in a steadier state of embedding early learning and childcare and improving services. Financial year 2022-23 represents an interim year for early learning and childcare funding. The specific revenue grant of £13.12 million will remain ring-fenced in the current financial year, while work continues together to agree the annual quantum for 2023-24 onwards, taking into account changing costs and population figures. The specific revenue grant is allocated across 3 key areas, which are employee costs, meals and payments to funded providers and childminders, and for cross-boundary early learning and childcare places. Also, in terms of risk, if a sustainable rate is not paid, there is a risk of services in the private and voluntary sector closing, which would incur capital and revenue costs for the council, which would reduce choice and local provision for parents, particularly in more rural areas, and would impact on communities. The closure of some services would also provide childcare paid for by parents, would have a negative impact on the local economy, with parents not being able to secure or sustain work or college. So in conclusion, Chair, Funding Follows the Child remains the long-term policy framework that will support the delivery of funded early learning and childcare and has been agreed by both the Scottish Government and COSLA. The payment of sustainable rates to funded providers in the private third and childminding services is vital to support financial sustainability and is a key aspect of Funding Follows the Child. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny, for that report. Excellent report. Members, any questions or comments? No, it's a straightforward report. I think some quite positive. Maureen's got a hand up. Maureen.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you. Janie, thank you, and thank you for your offer to have met in advance of Cabinet because of the events and holidays and my own personal circumstances. I'm sorry I wasn't able to take that up, but I do appreciate the offer. On the basis of that, Janie, I just have one question to ask. Obviously, we're looking at the potential for huge rises in energy costs in particular. I know that within the care sector, there is a minimum temperature which is set for establishments. So I'm asking the same question in terms of early years. Is there a minimum temperature that is set? And do you consider, on the basis of all of the information gathering that's been done, that what we are offering will enable us to go forward with that, with our providers, both actual providers in settings and our childminders? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mackay. Through you, Chair. Yes, the minimum temperature is 16 degrees. Inside, but also I think we need to reflect and highlight the point as well that for many of our children, they spend a long time outdoors, and some children will choose to stay outdoors for the whole of their early learning and childcare experience for a lot of the time every day. So it's also important that we have suitable clothing for children to wear, and we have invested both in terms of staff clothing, in terms of outdoor jackets and outdoor trousers, and also for children in terms of outdoor suits as well. So I think it's important that we recognise that children may still choose to play outdoors regardless of the temperature and in all weathers. In terms of indoors, we have to ensure that we do maintain a temperature of 16 degrees, and I do obviously recognise the points that you've made in terms of energy, and it's things that we will need to consider and continue to look at as time progresses. But at the moment, in terms of the rate that we are proposing to continue to pay for our funded providers, all the information that we have to hand at the moment would suggest and would confirm that they are able to meet their costs at the current time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Janie. That's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Maureen. Okay, any other comments? Okay, thanks very much, Janie. Thanks for that report. Okay, and now we've got Katie with responding to the cost of living crisis. Katie will introduce us.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, members. I'm going to give an introduction to this paper, and then Joe Gibson, who has been working alongside me, and that will take us through the core of the paper, and then Joe McLaughlin will take us through the financial element, and that actually expresses that this is a real collaborative approach that we're adopting towards the cost of living. This paper sets out our initial proposals, but it's really important to note that this is the beginning of this work, and actually we're consolidating work that we already have, and there's going to be a great deal of opportunity to layer on further pieces of work going forwards. So it is very much a collective approach with the Council and our workforce and our trade unions, Health and Social Care Partnership, our community planning partners, Ayrshire Civil Contingencies, and you'll hear more about Joe about when we move from mitigate and prevent into responding, that we are setting up really good frameworks around that as well. You as elected members are so important in this, and many of you engaged with me and my teams already around this, and of course we'll have a great opportunity to engage further tomorrow and get a right good debate about this and get some really good ideas on the table. So we have our seminar for members tomorrow, and we've also invited other council colleagues and trade unions along to that. And of course our business and our communities have a major role to play, and our further engagement with them will again allow this work to evolve. This initial piece of work is about consolidating and coordinating the existing services and networks that we have, pulling them into one place so that people can understand how to quickly get help across a number of key areas that you'll hear about, but also about making sure that if there's capacity required in specific areas to respond to the cost of living crisis, then that we've got that in place. Please note, members, that there'll be a very strong emphasis on pace and measuring progress, and you will be hearing about this over coming months. And we do expect to come back to you probably into October, November to full council, because this is of interest to all, to provide progress, but also to layer on further areas if they're required. It's important really to note as well that this is about all of us. None of us wanted to find ourselves in this position in the 21st century where people in our communities and our businesses are really struggling. And, you know, there's quite a lot of righteous anger around it. I think a lot of people feel very, very emotive about it. And what I've asked my staff to do and our leaders across the spectrum is really to turn that emotion into action so that we can really do the best leadership job we can around this. And I ask members to join me in that so that we do our very best together here to take this work forwards. So we will be equipping members with tools and different kind of resources so that they can help to get this message out to our communities. And that will tie in with a very wide campaign that's already soft launched based on our Kind, Caring and Connected campaign that we had over COVID. And although it is web-based, it is much wider than that. So there's a landing page that's been set up in a web-based way, but there's a full campaign that's going to be linked to newspaper, radio, and also we'll have a whole range of resources in and through communities. So you'll be delighted to hear, members, that we've reintroduced the postcard approach, because it worked so well for us. It's not rocket science, but it allows people to make contact with individuals in their homes, and we'll be doing that. So you'll get some resources tomorrow if you come along to the session, and if you don't, we'll make sure we get them to you. It's really, really important that we make the very, very best use of all the resources that we have. And one of the areas that we've got, and you'll hear more about in the report, is our energy group, which is co-chaired by Andrew Kennedy and Annika Friel. And they've been looking very carefully at all of the totality of the facilities that we have in East Ayrshire. They want to engage deeply with churches, community groups, and use our own facilities to make sure that neighbourhoods have a place to go and gather and keep warm and maybe eat together and maybe have some fun together as well and socialise. And that's so important. And that work's now well underway. And we've put money in here to enable that to happen and really come up at scale. And really, finally, then, I just think it's so important that we will respond to any contingencies going forward. This is the beginning. We will be engaging deeply with our businesses and our communities, hearing what they need and want, and enabling them to take this work forward. And you'll see the provisions there. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Jo, who's going to give you some background on this locally, nationally, our approach that we're proposing in East Ayrshire. And then you'll hear from Jo McLaughlin about the actual investment areas, extensive investment that will kick this work off. And then we're happy to take any questions going forward. So if I hand over to Jo Gibson.
Good morning,
Katie,
everyone.
Jo. Yep, morning.
Good morning. Is my sound okay?
Loud and clear. Yep.
Right, great, thanks. So, as the paper sets out, Cabinet are invited to note the significant challenges that households are facing as a result of increasing costs of living, consider and approve the proposals to mitigate these cost of living challenges, approve the use of the cost of living balance held by the Council, note and endorse our communication campaign, note our response through a cost of living officers group and strategic oversight group, remit further papers to be brought to Council as the situation evolves, and otherwise note the contents of the report. So, moving into some background, the cost of living, we are all acutely aware, has risen sharply in recent months, with the combined effect of rising inflation, food costs, interest rates, and fuel prices. No doubt the impact of the pandemic, economic uncertainty, and war has exacerbated some of these conditions. It is evident from increasing benefit claims and people seeking debt advice that the situation has already reached crisis point for some families in our community. This report recognises that there are constraints on what the Council can do, and it recognises the role of both the Scottish and the UK governments. We are acutely aware that these impacts are not being experienced evenly, and our most vulnerable residents in low-income households are most likely to be hit hardest. Earlier this year, this council approved a range of funding as part of the budget process to support financial inclusion, income maximisation, energy and debt advice. These funding streams have been active and are set out in section 4. UK wage growth in the last year has not been sufficient to keep pace with inflation. Energy costs are continuing to rise, albeit recent announcements will create a maximum cap for 2 years. I understand there have been significant announcements even this morning, colleagues, so the paper may need to be updated as a result. Energy costs are continuing to rise. The latest Bank of England forecasts inflation peaking at 13.1% in the fourth quarter of this year and expected to remain high for the next 2 years. In addition, supermarket inflation has increased by 10%, the highest rate in 13 years. In section 6, we report on a recent paper published by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, who sought to illustrate the current impact of the cost of living crisis on low-income households. Involving a poll of 4,000 low-income households in the UK between May and June of this year, the report found that around 45% of all of those families had family members either had family members either cut down or skip a meal, that a number, around 30% of families were unable to adequately heat their homes, and that was during spring and summer months, that arrears had already increased with 40% of families in arrears in at least one type of bill, and finally, that this is not just hitting workless households, that working age households were reporting the same levels of impact. As Katie mentioned, during the pandemic, our response was driven by our kind, caring, connected brand, and we hope to build on that with a further range of support to urgently help those in need. Our aim at this time is to prevent and mitigate potential hardship. Our response may need to evolve as the situation transpires over the coming weeks and months. Elected members will be provided with regular briefings to allow yourselves and communities to continually shape our response, and we imagine this report will be the first in a series. At section 8, we start to set out the local context. Rising food prices, increased energy bills and inflation are combining to create further hardship for people in lower middle incomes. We've seen community larder usage in East Ayrshire rise substantially in recent years. We have seen the unemployment rise substantially from 4.6 in 1920 to 7.3 in 2021. The business community also faces further pressures with increased costs for raw materials, labour shortages and energy price increases, potentially affecting early business closures and redundancies. Point 7 highlights the challenges to care homes, and Councillor Mackay has already drawn attention to this. Care homes cannot, by legislation, turn down the heating. They must remain at between 18 and 21 degrees. Recent reports from East Ayrshire care homes indicate in some cases a rise of 500% for gas prices. Work is ongoing locally and nationally to support this sector. So in section on the national response, we start to set out what some of the mitigation that's already been.
Joe, you've put yourself mute there.
Thank you, Chair. How far back did I do that? Have I?
National response, yeah.
Right, okay, excellent,
National
thank
response.
you. Thanks. So the UK government over recent months have put a set of measures in place totaling 37 billion, sorry. The majority of this relating to direct intervention for energy bills. It also offers 1.1 million families in receipt of tax credits with an additional cost of living payment and an additional cost of living payment to low-income households through their council tax bills. In terms of local response, We established some weeks ago a cost of living officers group, and that's jointly chaired by myself and the Deputy Chief Executive. We have met twice so far and developed a set of proposals, and I will ask Joe to talk us through the proposals in a few minutes. The group has agreed to set up a strategic oversight group also, so that we have a very small and focused senior group ensuring progress. The group identified 6 key themes that we feel that working on these themes will have the most significant impact for our communities. They are food, fuel, money, community, well-being, and business. In section 20, on the 23rd of August, the First Minister chaired an energy summit with energy company leaders and third sector partners. A number of commitments were made at that meeting, including a £12.5 million fund to be provided in 22-23 to support money advice, debt advice, and income maximisation. In addition, the UK Prime Minister has announced a freeze on energy bills, with households paying no more than £2,500 annually for the next 2 years. Support for business and a reversal of the national insurance increase is also presented. The Scottish Government's programme for government also set out further plans to mitigate the impact of the cost of living crisis, and these are set out in paragraph 22. Our communication campaign, sorry, I've lost my place, 1 second. Our communication campaign builds on the cost of living, builds on the pandemic approach about caring, kind and connected, but incorporating the 6 themes we've identified. The campaign will be hosted on our digital and social media platforms with targeted messages, bespoke communications and links to other supports, including third sector partners and resilience networks. With digital poverty becoming a possible concern, both with people having access to Wi-Fi and devices, but also beginning to be concerned about using the power to charge their devices, the campaign will include a lot of traditional communications as well, such as newspaper features, advertising, and highly visible outdoor advertising and distribution of printed leaflets and postcards. We are currently updating our flagship wellbeing directory, and this will be provided to all families. The campaign was launched quietly last week, whilst being sensitive to the national period of mourning, and will be updated as more information becomes available. The campaign will dovetail into other key activities over the coming weeks and months, including Challenge Poverty Week in October and the Living Wage Week in November. We are also developing a campaign toolkit for elected members, providing you with material and related communication so you can share that with your constituents, and we can encourage constituents to get to the best place to get the help they need. As Katie mentioned, our energy group has already begun to scope out work to consider the use of schools, leisure facilities and other community venues as a means of supporting local people with dignity. So a warm welcome can be offered, as well as resources to help people who are challenged at home. We are acutely aware that this challenge is being faced by our own colleagues too. A range of supports have already been put in place, and these will be reviewed and expanded as we learn more over the coming weeks. Services and managers are being encouraged to be flexible in meeting staff members' preferences in terms of working from home or in the office where that's possible, and to respond to the needs of individuals compassionately and on a case-by-case basis. We have also requested that any requests for special assistance are being reported and to the head of people and culture in an anonymous way, so we can track impact on numbers of staff affected. As Katie mentioned, I am engaging across Ayrshire in terms of the Ayrshire Local Resilience Partnership, and a cost of living subgroup has been established. We will continue to meet fortnightly to share learning, agree any pan-Ayrshire actions and responses, as needed. A range of other implications are set out in points 53 to 59, but I'd now like to hand over to Joe, who'll talk us through the proposals we'd like to consider today. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Lord Joe.
Thank you, Chair. Members, can I take you to paragraph 26 on page 21? In the table before you just sets out a range of options for you to consider today. As Katie touched on, there are a broad range of options. They demonstrate that collaborative working that's taken place at pace in the last few weeks across colleagues, across services within the Council that seeks to identify those areas for investment for you to consider today. The first option is around food. It's been picked up by Joe earlier on, and it notes a range of options and work across that, not just about providing food, but more than that, but providing support to our larders, giving the larders the surety and security to know that they'll be receiving stock. And more than that, though, looking at an education, food education programme, and at the same time, realising that in terms of the surplus food in our primary and secondary schools, that they too can be passed across to communities. And at the same time, working with colleagues across the Council on education and in the Leisure Trust and elsewhere, to try wherever possible to increase the uptake to free school meals and to that entitlement. And you can see in that first option there are a range of options coming in at just over £200,000, and I'll touch on the figures as we go through this table. Option 2 recognises reluctantly and regrettably that there will be a need to provide support not just in food but also around keeping warm. It's an approach, as Katie touched on, it's collaborative. You can see here it's housing and communities, facilities and property management and our leisure trust working together to identify the best placed assets, the best placed properties across East Ayrshire that can be used to provide that level of support. And as Katie touched on, it's not just about going there and being warm, but hopefully through the introduction of other options around food and support, that it's more than that. Number 3 takes some existing learning and the success that we've seen in a specific work around early years financial inclusion project for mothers of children up to 5 years old and also in pregnancy, and an option to extend that current arrangement to support that particular cohort. Number 4 gives us the option to think about it differently and move away from that action of providing response and support and nothing else, because option 4 asks us to consider, asks Cabinet to consider taking on the learning from a financial inclusion officer who has been placed in one of our high schools. It's a cost to the Council of £40,000 a year, but the evidence coming out of the financial inclusion team is that one employee working across that education group, that primary and secondary in that area, has brought in recurring benefit increase uptake in households of £70,000 recurring. The option here then is to provide one of such officer in each of the 7 mainstream schools and also in our ASN sector too. It's £320,000. It's for a year. We will try wherever possible to identify funding to extend that further. But we can see here it's not just about providing funding, but it's about maximising those benefits and producing a financial envelope for households that's greater than it currently is. Number 5 takes on more learning again. It goes back to the beginning of COVID, the executive committee that predates many members here today, but a committee that was set up to react at pace to COVID. It did so in a number of ways. One of those options was to provide some funding to me to allow business grants to be provided, but moreover, it provided a piece of funding to the previous head of Housing and Communities to provide rapid funding and grants to local community groups. And the option at number 5 is to continue that by awarding £350,000. It's a lot of money. It drips feed money at pace to community groups. And when you see what's been done with the COVID money, and you see it's about, energy card top-ups, mobile phone top-ups, it's not a lot of money. It's maybe £10 or £20 a time, but it makes a real difference in communities and to work with those communities who have walked alongside the COVID journey with us. They know where to place that funding, and so the option here at number 5 is to continue that and take that forward. At the same time, and based on previous discussions with elected members, we know that we've set aside £500,000 to support the business communities. Katie touched on it earlier, and so that option there is to remit the funding to the head of economic growth to take that forward. And number 7 shows that that collaborative approach is alive and well, and we have taken on board some of the discussions with members and with the business community. We know that at the budget setting process, Council agreed to provide money to the Head of Facilities and Property Management for a net zero grant. The Head of Facilities and Property Management has provided £100,000 to the Head of Economic Growth at number 7 to provide support towards net zero ambitions within the business community. It would seek recommendation to support this by £100,000. That would award grants of up to £3,000, and this is the next item on this agenda today, and the Head of Economic Growth can take us through that. And finally, at number 8, it recognises that Council has in the past sought to bolster the child Scottish Bridget payment that gets paid 4 times a year to families whose children are in receipt of free school meals. There's 2 final payments to be made, then this scheme ends. The next payment is in October, then the final one in December. And number 8 seeks approval today to add £100 to that final £130 payment that will be paid in December to coincide with Christmas. That comes to £2.2 million, and we can see that's about £400,000 remaining. It expands further by showing the previous announcement and allocation of funding that Council gave in February, and it shows a total investment today of just over £3.1 million. Members, we know that just as COVID taught us lessons, cost of living will do the same. We don't know everything today, and we will learn more as we hit winter, and Katie's already touched on that, as has Joe. And so there'll be a need to come back to you with more options, and it is likely that we'll come seeking approval to utilise maybe £1 million, £1.5 million of additional funding that's sitting in COVID recovery, if needed, to take on board the things that we don't yet know that will come out of cost of living as we progress through winter. And members, that's the options today. Katie's given us the overview. Joe's taken us through the detail of the national and the local picture. The table at paragraph 26 is our response, as Katie touched on. It's our interim response. It's an investment of £3.1 million with more to come. And the paper then asks members to consider these range of options. Note that there will be a further discussion, as Katie touched on, tomorrow at the member spotlight session. The recommendations, Chair, to Cabinet today are on page 16, paragraph 2, and Joe and Katie and I are happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Joe. I think this has been, in terms of this council, this has probably been one of our most key papers to date. I think we stated right at the outset, the council way back in May, the cost of living and the cost of living crisis would be, an absolute priority for this council, and we're so glad that others agreed. And I'm glad that we're going to be taking this forward with colleagues throughout the council to address this, because we know just even since May, we know that the problem is even worse since then as we head into winter, the winter months. Katie spoke about the righteous anger, and I think it is very much out there. I think East Ayrshire, whether you look for the turbines and Whiteleys to the former open cast sites down in Cumnock and Doon, that this authority, more than any other authority probably, has done more to fill the national grid for energy, and yet some of our community are going to feel the worst effects of this energy crisis. So I can understand that completely within our communities. Particularly, in our rural communities dependent on heating oil. We've heard recently, these communities that are dependent on these type of are going to be the most adversely affected, and that not only affects just their heating, but affects the whole economy in remote rural areas, as it does right across the economy. We hear, UK figures in terms of 6.5 million households are heading into fuel poverty. That's just an absolute disgrace. And we heard it last week. I think Joe Gibson mentioned it about the 2,500 cap that the government said they were going to put in annual fuel bills. And we heard from our own MP who quizzed the Prime Minister on that last week in the floor of the House of Commons, and that's now been found to be untrue. That 2,500 cap doesn't bear water, doesn't exist. So we've really got to work collaboratively right across the council and with our colleagues locally and nationally just to address that. But I think all we can do as a local authority is take some of the best mitigation that we can, and I think that's where this paper particularly sells itself. I see, Joe points out there to the 3.1 million that we've invested, including the paragraph 2026 with the 2.2 million there. Looking at food and keeping warm and supporting communities to support the young and the vulnerable. We see that the drop in donations to the food banks and food ladders, as everybody's finding it tighter, and the supermarkets, as we know, are finding things tighter. But we've really just got to, as I say, redouble our efforts to make sure that nobody in our communities freezes to death or goes hungry. And hopefully we can get the support of all 32 councillors round about that to do that and work together to see what we can best do to achieve that. And I see, the activity and engaging with voluntary groups and churches and take that learning. I think Joe McLaughlin there mentioned, the learning from the COVID. I think that's been important, through vibrant communities and other. Katie, I think that's been really, really important in how we get that assistance to our communities, and our communities can deliver and get that best. And it's important that we engage in activities that are not stigmatised, that can be fun, as you say, and just helps the resilience of our communities. So I'm very pleased with this paper, but I recognise it's just the start, and look forward to working together with other members and colleagues and hear what everybody's got to say this morning. But I think this for me is one of the most important activities to occupy us through the winter months, to sustain our communities and help right down to the individuals, the most vulnerable, to make sure that nobody's got the choice of heating and eating and throughout East Ayrshire, and hopefully we can all work together to that end. Okay, members, enough of me. I'm just, I know it's quite important, I didn't mean to maybe a bit of rant there, but I think it's really, really important that we state this as a real important priority for us. Members, Jim.
Thanks, Dougie. And I think the emotion of the current crisis we're in come through there in Dougie's words, and likewise with Katie and Joe. I find it difficult myself to understand why we're in such a crisis in the decade of the century we're in. However, we're there, we're going to have to live with it, and I know we can only mitigate some of the circumstances, and I think it's a big message that we're putting out there today, that this is limited by the council what we can mitigate, and we're reliant obviously on the wider Scottish Government and UK Government on that. A particular point I want to raise, and it might be worth raising this through what we're comms, that there's 15 billion in unclaimed benefits throughout the UK every year, and that's the latest figures. I mean, if these benefits, and we know they're unclaimed, why are the folk not getting them if they're unclaimed benefits? Why can they not go direct? They must have somebody out there knowing that these benefits are in the claim. So there's got to be an issue around about that. I see that's probably the additional 15 that they're throwing in the 22, but these benefits must be claimed. And that ties in probably to what Joe mentioned in option 4, and the additional officers trying to reclaim some of the benefits for us. It's again the anger I'm trying to contain myself, that I'm feeling that we're sitting in a position like this, and Dougie rightly pointed out there around about the wind farms and how East Ayrshire and historically with previous forms of fuel, we should have been self-sustainable in this, and we shouldn't have been going through this crisis. Yes, there are causes allegedly for the crisis that we're in, whether that's Brexit, whether it's the war in Ukraine, but we're in it. and we're going to have to deal with it. And I think hopefully as a collective group, no elected members, we can all pull together on this and try and pull it forward. Just finally, for me, I'd like to pay thanks to, I think he's been a national figure and he's fought for everybody's cause all the way through this, has been Martin Lewis. I think he's described the levers that he pulled, he can pull no more levers. He got to the extent where he was angry and swore and had to come back and apologise to a group that he's dealt with for years. But I'd like to pay tribute to him for everything that he's did as well over the last 4 or 5 months.
Thanks very much, Jim. Maureen? Maureen?
Thank you very much, Dougie. And again, I mean, I share your immense concerns. And I think the reality is that we are in this awful situation and we have to then take our roles and our responsibilities and actually very much accept and acknowledge that we have to really be the eyes and ears of our communities. It's information that we really need to make sure that our responses are actually appropriate and are actually, you know, hitting the areas that we actually need to hit. I think what we've got and what we've heard today is that this paper represents a start, and I think that's really helpful that we're acknowledging that that's where we are actually at this moment in time. I think you're completely correct, Jim, that we have to acknowledge that we as a council have huge desire and huge energy and will to actually do our absolute best by our communities. But we will require input from Scottish Government. We will require input from Westminster Government to really be able to mitigate against some of the issues that we have. I think that it is really important that we come together as elected members and we actually do operate very much as that eyes and ears within our community. We can only expect officers to respond to information that they have, and hence our role is very much being that. We hope that social media actually has a role to play in relation to that. That's a positive role. And I think we then need to look to the work of our comms teams. And again, I think, Katie, you have suggested a particular approach. Joe, you have made reference to social media working, digital working, when people actually have already spent the money on charging and being able to keep recharging devices. And I think that's important for us to learn. One of the things that, again, I've spoken to already to officers is that I do sincerely believe that at this stage, we don't fully know yet the groups, and the groups potentially don't know themselves yet that they are going to need services, because I suspect that they will largely be groups that to date have been people who have managed their lives exceedingly well without any additional supports and inputs. And I think we need to be alert and look how we can actually make contact with those groups. I know that part of what we are presenting within this paper is again using community groups. I understand the desire to do that. I have to say, I have had some concerns expressed to me already that community groups are at an exhaustion stage in terms of what they have delivered throughout COVID, and are concerned about their ability to keep having volunteers and keep having the resource to be able to give to our community. It's not a lack of desire, it's just in practical terms what the impacts on individuals, families and communities have actually been. So I think we need to be alert to that. I welcome the money that is presented to us and the proposals that are presented to us. I think it would be wrong to do anything other than to welcome that at paragraph 26. Again, underlining, of course, that this is a starting position. And again, I've had some opportunity since I spoke to officers last week to think a bit more about this. So I'm making a further suggestion today on something that I think picks up the themes between the groups that we already know about, perhaps the groups that we don't know about and are not sure themselves about what supports could be available to them at the moment and what the role of a local authority would be. And I wonder if, again, thinking about, yes, we have got school meals, we want to increase the uptake of children who are eligible to free school meals, but at this moment in time, we know that we carry a level of debt across school meals. And I wonder if, as a starting position, we could also add in some additional funding whereby we actually write off that school meal debt as a starting point. Again, that has the potential, I would suggest, to reach families who up until now have been managing. The fact that they are no longer able to actually put finance into what is children's accounts who are actually attending school, I think does indicate to us that there is a growing problem. And my suggestion at this stage would be an additional that we actually look to write off the current level of school meal debt that we have in East Ayrshire, and that's something that the financial group that is actually looking at can look and report back to us on when we see that increasing. So with that, but welcoming the paper at this stage and very much looking forward to tomorrow's starting spotlight session, I would like to make that as an additional proposal. Thank you.
Thanks, Maureen. A couple of comments just in your remarks. I think in terms of I recognise just exactly what you're saying in terms of our communities and the level of stress that they're under. You know, we're absolutely pushing them to the limit. We know they've been working flat out throughout the COVID period, and there is that element of exhaustion. But we know that, and we hope that vibrant communities and other sections of our staff will support those groups and give them any kind of resource we can to support them. In terms of the writing off the school debt, I think that's something we've been discussing back and forward. But you know, just it's obviously we want to support communities the most vulnerable where we can, and maybe bring in Joe just to kind of what the kind of Katie, maybe, who's going to...
Yeah, no, between the two, I mean, this is something we've been given a great deal of thought to, and I've had a number of representations. Councillor Cowan has come to me, and a number of members have discussed this with us, and there's quite a national kind of focus around this just now. And Andrew and his team have been looking at it in depth, and it's certainly something we think is on the table, and we need to look at, you know, the impact of it and what that is made up of. So we've done some analysis of it, and it's something we could move fairly quickly on. But if you would just give us a wee bit of time to look at the kind of nature of the debt, how it relates to primary and secondary. And I want to bring us, you know, we've agreed we're going to be right across the board behind this, but I need to make sure that we make good strategic decisions, and so that actually it's got long-term benefit. And there could be some really good links between the free school meal and primary and how we actually tether those two things to each other, because that makes sense. So, you know, from my point of view, it's something I expected to be raised today, and it's something I would like to come back to you fairly quickly with a full analysis and let you have some decision making around it. And we expected it to come up more detail tomorrow. So I think it would be good for us to bring this with a really measured approach, so you can see the whole picture, and then as members you can make that determination. But we won't take a long time over it. We can bring you back a dedicated paper in that.
I'll bring in Eddie.
Just a tiny bit. We've spoke about this so much. The first line we always say, no child is going to get turned away from getting a meal at any East Ayrshire school. So that's the baseline for us here. And then absolutely we need to look at all these different options of how we make sure we support people. And as we say, we absolutely anticipate we're going to have to look at the back debt, but we also, on a recurring basis, we need to get these, you know, financial advisors into the school. So we're not just writing off one debt and then it builds up again. You're actually investing to actually prevent the debt being there in the first place.
Claire?
I don't want to add too much or labour too much to what's already been said, and I'm glad we are looking at school meals. I know it's something we brought up ourselves. It's the financial inclusion officer going into the schools. This just shows how important that is, and I think it's one of the best measures we're doing in this paper today. We've always tried to be preventative and proactive before people get into trouble. And just very quickly on what Maureen was talking about earlier about the associations and the community groups, I spent a long time on the phone last night to one group in particular, full of volunteers and struggling, very struggling, because they're having to constantly reprioritise what they're dealing with. And it's the cost of living crisis that's causing this. And it was a very disturbing phone call. So I welcome this paper, and I'm thoroughly looking forward to the spotlight tomorrow when we all get a good chance to discuss this. So thank you very much for the paper.
Thanks, Claire. Ian?
Thanks, Dougie. Claire's just touched on it. I was going to say that my discussions with Joe about the Pathfinder project up at Loudon Academy, I mean, the feedback we're getting there, particularly the fact that it's quite a discreet service. I think the fact that the parents of those are affected can go into school and speak to the officers, you know, in an environment that's not normally associated with people who are struggling financially. I think that's a good thing. I think more sort of generally, Dougie, I mean, I think, you know, the fact that we're even discussing this in 2022 is frankly appalling in what is one of the wealthiest countries in the world. You know, political choices have been made, be that, you know, lifting the camp in bankers and looking at 30 billion tax cuts. This is the priority for Great Britain. This should be the number one priority, making sure that people don't have to put up with this.
Absolutely agree. Just maybe before bringing it anybody else, just in terms of the one suggestion about writing off the capital debt, you know, just I think that's something we'll all be really absolutely interested in support, but I think we need to get it right and just make sure, as Eddie's saying, you know, that we're nipping it, you know, not just as a one-off, but, you know, for future children that are coming through our establishments. Katie?
Yeah, through you, Chair, we bring a paper back early to Cabinet, setting out the full context, as Eddie set out, and also our approach to early intervention prevention, and alongside that, and we would set that out for members' consideration. So it's something we can turn around fairly quickly because we've been doing some work on it.
Okay, I've got a couple of Jim, then Elaine.
It's just a quick, you know, something that Eddie said that no child will be sent away if they present themselves for a meal. That's okay if they present, but if they don't present themselves, maybe through the under instructions for their parent, and maybe through the parent's vanity or even pride, of tell the kid not to present themselves. How do we identify that child that child's not eating?
Yeah, through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor McMahon. It's a great question. The schools know their families and their kids really well. And that's why it would be hugely beneficial to us to have the time to, you know, further explore the debt that sits there, and can also concur with the point that was very well made around about no child is ever sent away. The issues around about someone not presenting, Councillor McMahon, could be addressed in several ways, because obviously we're talking about a huge variety of contexts here, both in primary and secondary, and the staff are absolutely eagle-eyed in terms of a young person not presenting either to the packed lunch area or indeed, you know, one of the catering zones. So I would really trust my teams out there, Councillor McMahon, to make sure that nobody went. And to be honest, my time as a head teacher did come across a couple of those young people. And actually, in terms of being able to then assist the family, the eyes are on them. I think that's the reassurance that I could give you, Councillor McMahon, at this stage, is that the staff and the people in the schools know those kids really, really well.
Thanks, Linda. Elaine?
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on the point Councillor Mackay made about the school day. I've been speaking to officers in the background since a recent visit down at Dalmellington. That visit was to introduce a food mascot. So I think there's also some positives we can do through the school meals, but there are some layers to the debt across the whole school estate, so it's actually quite interesting. And I think, backing up what Katie says, I think we need to do a bit more in-depth study there to get that long-term right, rather than just wiping off a one-off debt in the first instance. The second thing I was wanting to pick up on was the financial inclusion project. My assumption is that, sorry, this is point 4 in the table on page 22. My assumption is that will be redeployment of existing staff rather than recruitment of new staff, because obviously we don't want to introduce any lag times with any of these actions if the paper's approved today. So just want to know a clarification if it is redeployment of existing financial officers.
Yeah, I'm probably answering for Joe Gibson here, but we've actually had some traffic about this as well, because we need the new capacity, but we want to try and find a way to get that capacity quickly. So we are looking at secondments and other kind of imaginative ways within the organisation, because it's excellent training that's given, so we can bring people up to speed fairly quickly. So we're looking at existing services, existing teams, but also a potential secondment opportunities for other people. Last resort would be to go out, because it'll take a wee while to do it, but we'll do our best to pull people in quickly. Councillor Cowan, thanks.
Okay, so I would be suggesting, well, I would be proposing that we support Maureen's suggestion by bringing a further paper an early day within the next month to look at, you know, to investigate writing off the debt where we can. Would that be right in some of those terms, right? Okay, O'Neill.
Thanks very much, Chair. It's just to give thanks to the officers for bringing this in front of us. Obviously, it's a big body of work that we will need to concentrate over the next few months, and certainly our communities will be put under a huge amount of pressure, financial and otherwise, over the winter. My question is in regard to communication. Obviously, we've recognised that some people will not be in a position to receive or talk to us through digital communication. So it's really to obviously focus on those folk who are in most need in regard to their financial position, and make sure that we identify and communicate with those folk through maybe those traditional methods that we've talked about, leaflets and postcards. And certainly as a ward councillor, I'll be very happy to help you do that in whatever means possible.
Yeah, thanks so much, Councillor Ingram, and it echoes what Councillor Mackay said. I think the elected members have such a pivotal role as community leaders here, and having that intelligence in your own wards, I think, is so important. And we just need to hear what's coming through, and we'll take that on board. Also, what we've really been cognisant about making, you know, the digital offer there, but for every one of the 6 work streams that Joe Gibson outlined, there's a phone number. And also we're going back to traditional postcards, and we were just getting the design right for them last week. And because I think they were so effective during COVID, there's a bit to write on in the back. So community groups can use them, you can use them, people can use them for each other, just to say what kind of help they need. And so absolutely, and we will obviously evolve this, but I think the way that we'll engage deeply with yourselves is that you can bring intelligence to us at any point, and then we would respond to that. But actually, if we see patterns emerging, then we would be bringing you wider interventions that would fit what we're seeing emerging, because we think patterns will emerge. So we've put the best amount of money we can into community, to food, to the areas that we think are important. But as Joe McLaughlin has said, we may need to change our investment model based on what's coming from the people that we serve. This is absolutely about the people we serve. It's not about some fancy work streams that all fit. It's about getting a phone number and getting the help you need when you need it. And it's about telling us what's the issue and us responding to that, to you as an individual, as a family. But if we see something bigger emerging and there's a pattern and a lot of people are experiencing the same thing, it's about bringing something back to you that's fit for the people we serve. So I hope that gives you reassurance.
Thanks, Katie. Okay, members, just go to the recommendations now and add recommendations that are there, and add support Maureen's suggestion with a further paper to come within the next month, if that's possible. Okay, can we agree recommendations? No, Drew, did you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair. I just want to thank the Deputy Chief Executive and the officers for bringing such a proactive paper in front of us, always on the front foot. And as Neil has said there, communication is key here, because I know locally in the Doon Valley area, the Citizens Advice Bureau is a phone number now, and I think people are struggling to actually get there. So if we can do things, and as Councillor Mackay had mentioned there as well, social media, but not so much the council social media, but local social media. And that's maybe something we could pick up, Katie, in localities, to try and get in every area that local social media that people are on all the time, basically, and get the message out there. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Drew. Okay, so in terms of just moving the recommendations again with an additional recommendation, can we agree? Okay, thanks very much, everyone. And that's the end of the E items. Thank you for your participation again. Okay, now going to item 4, which is the Net Zero Business Support Grant Scheme. And David.
Chair, the purpose of the report is to seek approval to implement a new Net Zero Business Support Grant to help local businesses to save energy, carbon and money. Paragraph 3 sets out the Cabinet decision which Joe McLaughlin referred to earlier to support our net zero aspirations. Recognising that many businesses were looking for information, advice and support to allow them to determine the most effective options available for reducing their carbon consumption, it was agreed that £100,000 of this funding should be set aside to explore how we could provide this assistance to our local business base. To support our net zero aspirations and in recognition of the challenges which businesses now face with rising energy prices, this report provides details of support now available both nationally to our local businesses, and also sets out the proposals to establish a net zero business support grant, which is designed to give direct financial support to encourage our local businesses to reduce their carbon emissions through a number of interventions. Paragraph 5 to 8 confirms the government's national support provided to businesses from energy efficiency business support services to provide free and partial support to access information and funding to help small and medium-sized enterprises reduce their energy consumption. Through Business Energy Scotland, businesses are offered an assessment to provide a carbon reduction plan which makes recommendations in the best way for businesses to reduce their energy and carbon consumption and cut costs. Additionally, East Ayrshire Council, through the Low Carbon Challenge Fund, programmes managed by the University of Strathclyde, can provide a carbon reduction plan for businesses focused on SMEs. Recognising the information and advice service currently available nationally, rather than duplicate this resource locally, is instead proposed that £100,000 funding agreed to support local businesses should be used to intensify and encourage small businesses to engage with Business Energy Scotland or the university and offer them a net zero advice towards the support grant. It should be noted that demand for support will be monitored with a view of procuring expert help as part of the Be Ready programme in the event that businesses are delayed should the Business Enterprise Scotland or University of Strathclyde reach capacity. To help support local businesses to not only transition towards net zero, but also to help alleviate the current rises in energy prices, it's proposed that the net zero grant is established, and paragraph 10 sets out the grant eligibility. It is proposed that this grant may be opened up to all businesses that are based in East Ayrshire, have been trading for at least 12 months and employ between 3 and 49 people. Applicants must be working with the Business Energy of Scotland or the university and have completed the business energy efficiency audit, which delivers a carbon reduction plan. This will ensure that they're able to demonstrate that the project will help to move their businesses towards net zero. Recognising the limited finance of £100,000 that is available for this scheme, it suggested that the grant should cover 50% of the approved project expenditure up to a maximum of £3,000. However, it is noted that where businesses do find themselves in hardship and can't reach the 50%, there is delegated powers to reconsider this. Chair, the report aligns with the Council's net zero ambitions, and paragraphs 12 to 14 confirms that there are no legal, procurement, risk or financial implications The recommendations are set out in paragraph 12, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, David. I mean, some of this follows seamlessly for our last paper. I think there was a stat I read that 60% manufacturers thought the out of control energy prices would have an effect on them being able to operate for more than 12 months. So, I mean, it's absolutely startling. So some of the work we've been doing over the last few years in net zero is excellent. And just but not just attracting new business, but protecting a lot of current manufacturers. So a lot of good work here, David. Members, any questions, comments? Claire?
Just a quick comment. Moving on from the cost of living crisis in the last paper, I think this is correct, that it should be pulled out and dealt with differently, because it's not just cost of living crisis, this is going forward and it's carbon reduction. It's not just a response to the energy crisis just now, and I like that it has nice strict criteria around it as well. It's not money that's just being handed out, and they'll come out with an energy plan, a long-term energy plan at the end of it. So I actually think this is a really good paper. For all it's short, there's an awful lot in it. So I welcome this paper. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, totally agree. Anyone else? Don't see any other hands up or anything. Okay, can we agree recommendations? Okay, thanks. And on now to the Mauchline Conservation Area proposed Article 4 direction removal of deemed advertisement consent. Carl.
Thanks, Chair. The purpose of this report is to present to Cabinet documents pertaining to a proposed Article 4 direction and the removal of deemed advertisement consent in Mauchline Conservation Area, and to seek authority to submit the required documentation to the Scottish Government for final approval. There are 5 recommendations associated with this report as set out in paragraph 2. This paper follows a Cabinet report you might recall from the 1st of June this year, where we met and approved draft documents relating to these matters, following which these documents went out to public consultation. The background to the paper is set out in paragraphs 3 to 6 of your report, and sets out that in support of our application for a Conservation Area Regeneration Scheme grant application, and to gain a full understanding of the characteristics of the conservation area, a conservation area appraisal was undertaken, and that appraisal recognised that there were some inappropriate built environment interventions in the conservation area. So in order to demonstrate our commitment to the CARS scheme and to protecting and enhancing the conservation area, we proposed at that point that we prepare these directions. The purpose of the Article 4 direction is to bring under planning control certain permitted development rights, essentially therefore meaning that certain works that currently don't require planning permission will do so in the future within the conservation area. And similarly, the removal of deemed consent for advertisements means that certain types of adverts that don't currently require consent will do so in the future. And the overall intention is not to prevent development, but to ensure it's of a type and quality sensitive to the conservation area. Paragraph 7 sets out the consultation period closed at the end of June with 1 representation received. And the scope of this objection was really around the council having a say in what happened to somebody's personal property. But incidentally, the classes of development which we're removing through the orders are not likely to have any effects on the development rights of the householders in the property concerned. We're therefore recommending it remains appropriate to remove the classes of development that are set out in paragraphs 8 and 9. I'll not go through these, but I'll just mention that there had been some concern at Cabinet back on the 1st of June around temporary signs for events or community activities and whether this would cover them, and I can confirm that it doesn't cover these, so they'll be able to continue without any impediment to them. Paragraph 11, subject to approval of the recommendations, the documents relating to the Article 4 direction and the removal of deemed consent will be submitted to Scottish ministers. Should they be approved, there will be notices placed in local newspapers. The report sets out a number of implications in paragraphs 13 to 23, and there are none in particular that I'll draw your attention to. Overall, the proposal helps to secure the progress of the Mauchline Conservation Area Regeneration Scheme and hopefully to deliver an improved built environment in the historic town of Mauchline. Just take you back to the recommendations in paragraph 2, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Karen. Any questions? It's quite straightforward. I think the banners at the.
Yes, please.
Oh, yeah, Maureen.
Sorry, I was struggling there just to get on. It's just to say that, again, I welcome the comments made in presenting the report in relation to householders' individual development rights not going to be affected by this. I think that has been subject of some very real concerns, and also the fact that the temporary signage, which again for some really important and ongoing annual events in Mauchline, again there has been some local concern expressed in relation to that, and I think the reassurances that we've been given here today help us to move forward and accept the recommendations.
Thanks very much, Maureen. Okay, members, can we therefore agree recommendations? Okay, thanks. And we go to item 6 now, and that's a housing land audit 2021. David. Oh, Karen, sorry.
Thanks, Chair. The purpose of this report is to present to members the housing land audit for 2021, which examines anticipated housing completions over the 5 years from the date of the audit. And we're seeking approval of the audit, and subject to that approval, we'll publish the audit on the Council's website. The housing land audit is undertaken on an annual basis and forecasts the number of homes to be built each year for the next 5 years in the Council area. And the target for how many homes we expect to build during the local development plan period is set out in the plan itself. And the forecasting lets us measure how many homes are likely to be built against the target that we've set, and to consider whether we have enough land to meet that target. The 2021 audit was prepared during summer and autumn 21, and we met with various different and consulted with various different organisations on this, including private developers, their agents, Homes for Scotland and registered social landlords. And as per paragraph 6, Homes for Scotland endorsed the findings of the audit in February 2022 after a period of constructive consultation. Paragraph 7 presents the predictions for the number of homes that's anticipated to be completed per year in each sub-housing market area and in East Ayrshire as a whole. And paragraphs 9 and 10 set out the context for the numbers against which we measure our progress and the time period we are using. Scottish planning policy states there should always be enough effective land for at least 5 years, and that where a shortfall in the 5-year housing land supply emerges, development plan policies for supply of effective housing land will not be considered up to date. In this context, paragraph 13 summarises the 2021 audit, finds the housing land audit will not be achieved in East Ayrshire as a whole or any sub-housing market area, and there is a shortfall in the number of homes which have been built during the 6 years since the adoption of the proposed plan. Turning to paragraph 14, notwithstanding that there is a healthy supply of allocated housing land throughout East Ayrshire, with room to accommodate more than 4,900 homes, and a substantial proportion of this land is located in Kilmarnock and Loudon, which is the area of greatest demand. Putting the housing land audit into context, the numbers presented today don't affect the numbers in the proposed local development plan, which was agreed back in March, nor the ambitions for local development plan 2, as this work on the 2021 audit was taken in context at the time of its preparation. However, it is worth noting that what we have in local development plan 2 better reflects development ambitions and is more reflective of likely demand. Subject to Cabinet approval of this report, we intend to publish the audit so that it can be used to inform planning decisions and appeals and provide an up-to-date body of evidence to assist in the examination of LDP 2. There are notes against each of the implications in paragraphs 21 to 28 for your consideration, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks for that report. Jim, do you want to come on?
No, I'm content. I think we had the P agenda with a bit of clarity around about and making that difference between the LDP2 plan and what we're actually asking to recommend today.
Thanks, Jim. Anyone else? Any comments? Okay. Well, can we agree recommendations? Okay, thanks. And last but not least, the Ayrshire Collaborative Leadership Academy.
Thanks, Chair. This paper brings forward to Cabinet information around a new leadership academy and seeks authorisation to enter into a negotiated contract for reasons that how the academy has already been established between the Hunter Foundation and Scottish Government and Columba 1400. Some members may already be aware of the work of Columba 1400. It's basically been based around children and families, and we've seen a really positive impact on both our teaching staff, our head teacher programme and our young people doing that. Through that work, Scottish Government have then worked alongside with them to look at how they can, bring forward a genuinely different model of leadership across Scotland and entered into, a cross-sector leadership programme based on values that have come up from that. So they already have had Tayside, where the three councils and NHS, Tayside and Police Scotland have participated in the first academy. And following on from that, there's been two national programmes that I've attended along with NHS Ayrshire and Chief Executive Claire Burden, with a number of other chief executives and also Scottish Refugee Council, COSLA, etc. And I have to say it was a really positive experience to be able to work with other people and to see how that comes together. The programme purpose and concepts are outlined at paragraph 4, and the purpose really of bringing it here is because of that already existing third-party arrangement the government have already contracted with Columba, then we need to enter into a negotiated contract rather than go out to tender for the programme. So that's the purpose of actually bringing it here to seek approval from Cabinet.
Thanks, Eddie. Members, any comments, questions? Are we okay? I think it's straightforward. Can we agree recommendations? Okay, that concludes business for today's Cabinet. Thank members and everyone else for the attendance. Okay, I think sounding board, we've got sounding board coming up at, what time was it? 12? 12 o'clock. Okay, we'll see some of you then.